So there I was, standing by the side of the highway, hands on my head, sweating through my t-shirt, and getting a pat down from a burly officer of the law, the contents of my pockets spread out on a bench next to me. The day had started like any other. I had walked with Morena down to her office, then caught the train to one of Barcelona's wealthiest neighborhoods. It's called Sarrià, and it's on the edge of town next to Tibidabo, and I was just exploring and having a little adventure. Ambling past the expensive shops in Sarrià, I was admiring the beautiful weather. I stopped in a church called Sant Vicenç and stood in the back. They were doing Mass. A priest in green robes was holding up the wafer for its transubstantiation into the body of Christ. Nice building, and a lot of people here for a Tuesday morning. After a minute, an old lady comes up to me and says, "Someone's stolen my phone and my wallet. Did you see anything?" "Nope," I said. "I just got here." Kind of a bummer, I thought, to get robbed in church. Little did I know my day was about to take a strange turn. A couple of minutes later, I'm leaving past the statue of St. Anthony of Padua and the crucified Jesus with his crown of thorns. Mass is still in progress. The old lady catches me on the way out. "I'm really distraught," she says. "All my papers were in the wallet, and now someone's stolen it. Can I look in your backpack?" "No, you can't look in my backpack," I said. "Well, if you were innocent, you wouldn't mind," she replied. "I have rights to privacy, and I'm not going to show you what's in my backpack." She was very agitated, started getting tears in her eyes, told me, "I'm calling the police." To which I said, "Yes, please, Senora, call the police." Otherwise, she seemed like a normal lady, but she was adamant about looking in my backpack. The thing is, the only evidence she had was that I was leaving the church, and it was more convenient to harass me than to bother everyone inside. "If you were innocent," she repeated, "you wouldn't have a problem letting me see what's in your backpack." I didn't quite have it in me to explain that police states around the world love the logic of if you're innocent, then you should have nothing to hide. So I just waved her off and walked up the street. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 118, and it is about your rights in an encounter with Spanish law enforcement. You never know when you might need to know this stuff. This is episode 119. I'm going crazy trying to record this thing with somebody using a circular saw outside my window, so I apologize if there is a bit of noise. I think the workers have gone on their lunch break at this point, but it is possible that they will be back at any moment. Shout out today to Raul. You remember Raul from BikeTourinSpain.com. I've talked about two of the routes that he organizes that I was fortunate enough to go on. The route of Don Quixote down in La Mancha, south of Madrid, was excellent. It was episode 76 of the podcast, in case you would like to listen. And then more recently, I did a route through the west of Spain, a region called Extremadura, which was literally one of the best Spain-based experiences I have had in over 20 years of being here. That is episode 94, if you would like to listen to that. So I did some work for Raul the other day. He is organizing a route from Madrid to Valencia, and he has the instructions in English. He has detailed instructions of how to follow the route. There's also, of course, GPS tracks that you can download and use, but he wanted some help with the English on the instructions for the route. I helped him out, and in exchange, he made a donation to the podcast. So thank you very much, Raul. Head over to BikeTourinSpain.com and look at the routes. They have the routes that I mentioned, Don Quixote and Extremadura. They also have Madrid to Valencia. They have one up in La Rioja wine country, I believe, if you're into that sort of thing. Just check it out. They're well organized. Raul provides the bike. He has accommodation booked for you. All you have to do is pedal from one place to the other and, find food during the day. And the instructions that I helped with, for example, tell you where to find food and water along the way, whichever route you're doing. So, biketourinSpain.com. Thank you, Raul. Second shout out today to Scott. Scott says, stumbled on the podcast in anticipation of our first visit to Spain in October, Madrid, Barcelona, Menorca, and have greatly enjoyed the content. Thank you very much, Scott. I hope you enjoy your trip to Madrid, Barcelona, and Menorca. Feel free to get in touch when you're here. I might be able to step out for a coffee or something. And in any case, thank you very much for the donation. If you would like to donate, head over to expatmadrid.com/donate. And you can send however much money works for you. Thank you very much, expatmadrid.com/donate. So we left our story at the part where I sort of waved off this old woman who was accusing me of stealing her wallet, and I walked on up the street. I didn't look back, but it appeared out of the corner of my eye that the lady was following me. I went several blocks up, and after a while I found an area with some benches. I took some water out of my backpack. I had water and a sandwich in there because I was hoping to hike up Mount Tibidabo a bit later. And what do you know? When I looked around, the old lady was there, glaring at me from a safe distance. She had picked up one of her geriatric friends along the way and was standing on the corner 20 meters away from my bench. A few minutes later, the police came. Mossos d'Esquadra, the Catalan police force. There were 3 of them, 2 bearded guys and a girl. The girl was quite attractive, except for the stupid stick-and-poke tattoos on her arms. And other than the uniforms, they all looked like normal people I could see at my gym. A lot of people at my gym are police anyway. Long story short, the attractive girl looked through my backpack, and the bigger of the 2 guys had me put my hands on my head while he frisked me. He felt my nuts twice, just in case. They took my ID, and the guy who had just groped me took off his gloves and asked what had happened. I told them the story. It was basically nothing outside of the old lady's imagination. And they let me go. All in all, this was a stupid situation that I just hope doesn't happen again. And humble public servant that I am not going to get felt up by law enforcement without turning it into content for my audience. So I guess today's topic is dealing with the police. Can Spanish police ask for your ID or search you on the street? The answer is basically yes. The 2015 law known as the Ley Mordaza, the gag law, states that the police can stop and search people if they believe there's danger to the public, or if they think a crime has been committed. They can also ask you for your identification, and if you refuse it, they can take you to the police station to be identified through other means. All this was enacted in response to the wave of protests that happened during the economic crisis of 2008 to 2014, and it's been controversial to say the least. But it's still on the books despite the newer socialist government talking about wanting to change it. Personally, I am a pretty law-abiding guy. My days of rebellion against the status quo, bourgeois society, and the man are far behind me. And I figured if I refused to show my ID or didn't want to be searched, the police would put me through something far more annoying and time-consuming. I would rather just move on with my day. So let's talk about your rights when dealing with Spanish police. Basically, if there are indicios razonables, reasonable indications, I guess, that you have committed or are planning a crime, the police can stop, identify, and search you. But indicios razonables are a pretty subjective thing. Also, they can search your car if you're driving. Sometimes there are police checkpoints on Spanish highways looking for drunk drivers or whatever else. It used to be terrorism, now not so much. Furthermore, this may be useful to some listeners here. If you're leaving a weed club, police can search and fine you if you're found in possession. I talked about the cannabis issue in episode 35 and elsewhere, I believe. The weed clubs are still around, and so is the legal gray area. But a police officer could see you coming out of a weed club and decide that that is indicios razonables enough, and he could decide to give you a pat down right there on the street. The legal gray area says that you are allowed to obtain weed, but you are not allowed to sell it or transport it. You also can't consume it in public. If you do obtain weed somewhere, that part at least is legal, but afterwards, if you're transporting it home, that could be an issue. Also, of course, as I mentioned in episode 35, we're making the word obtain do a lot of the heavy lifting in this legal gray area because the weed clubs will say that they are not selling anything and you are not buying it. You are just obtaining it. However, there may be in these places an exchange of money. I don't know. I'm just saying to be careful when walking out of a weed club. The fines can be pretty heavy if you're caught with 2 grams of weed in your underwear. On the other hand, the police cannot check your mobile phone without a warrant, and they cannot enter your house, again, unless they have a warrant. The Spanish word for warrant is una orden judicial. The only way they can enter your house without your invitation or a judicial order is in cases of flagrante delicto, meaning that they can see that a crime is taking place or has just taken place. That's all in Article 18 of the Constitution. El domicilio es inviolable is a good Spanish sentence to learn. What I'm saying with all this is that if a police officer knocks on your door and asks if he can come in, you have the right to say no. The usual caveat to all of this is that I am not a lawyer and this is not officially legal advice. You should definitely talk to an actual Spanish lawyer about all of your big burning legal questions. If you go to the police and say, well, I heard it on Daniel's podcast, your day might get worse rather than better. My recommendation also is to comply first and then sue the police later if you have to, with the help of a lawyer. If they get evidence off of you using illegal means, it will be disallowed in court anyway. But back to my run-in with Spanish police. Because I was absolutely not going to let some random stranger go through my backpack. And I sort of assumed that the police would take one look at me and decide that I don't fit the usual profile of pickpockets in Barcelona. But what do I know? Maybe I do fit some profile. Maybe I look like an English teacher who's down on his luck and stealing from old ladies during Mass. Or maybe they're just doing their job. I let them search my bag. I was a bit surprised by the frisking and nut grabbing, but they let me go in the end. I ain't no pickpocket, just a sweaty ginger guy. As they were finishing, one of the mozos picked up my cheap Android phone. "Is this hers?" he said. "No," answered the girl. "She said she lost an iPhone." So that's that. I assume that if I had walked a bit faster, I could have just disappeared in the neighborhood and the police never would have caught up with me. But I was innocent, and with nothing to hide, I also didn't feel like I needed to run. All in all, it was a bit stupid. Afterwards, I took the funicular up Tibidabo and had a nice walk around. I saw some panoramic views of the city, except for the frisking. It wasn't a bad day. I have mentioned from time to time my sordid past as a young immigrant. My episode about immigrant life, episode 114, gets into it a little bit. It's not like I've never broken a law in my life, but these days I tend to be a law-abiding and tax-paying citizen. So I just assumed that this sort of thing would never happen to me. The only time I had actually been on the wrong side of the law here in Spain was around 15 years ago, actually. I was walking in Lavapiés, one of the most overrated neighborhoods in Madrid, and some police officers were stopping foreign-looking people. I was actually here illegally at the time, but I handed over my Arizona driver's license, and they let me pass without further questions. I guess I was lucky that day. Other than that, in almost 21 years in Spain, I've had very little contact with the police. I called them a few months ago when Ocupas were breaking into my building, and I have, like I said, lots of police officers at my gym, but I haven't really had contact with the law. My understanding, though, is that if a police officer sees you, doesn't like the look of you, and decides to find indicios razonables in order to search you, he can probably come up with some indicios. But the chances of that are pretty low. I have heard of the national police checking people's IDs in train stations to see if they're legal or not, but I think that's also pretty rare. And just being illegal is not enough to get you deported. From what I'm reading, if the police decide you are not supposed to be in Spain, they will fine you and move on. They can only deport you if there are other circumstances, like you are misrepresenting your nationality, or if they've stopped you and found that you are illegal after you have just been committing some other crime, then they can give you an orden de expulsión. But mostly, according to what I've seen, they will just fine you and move on. As usual, have your questions answered by a lawyer and not a blogger, and all this will go better for you. So let's talk about what to do if you are arrested in Spain. If you are arrested in Spain, first of all, stay calm. You have certain rights that probably will not surprise you. They're basically the same as the ones you would have in the US. You have the right to remain silent. There's no obligation to tell the police anything. You have the right to an attorney. If you have someone in mind, if you already have a lawyer, you can make the call. Otherwise, the police will get you a lawyer. It will be free if you can't afford one. I don't know how they figure out whether or not you can afford it, but you may end up paying if you're able. The important thing is that you get a lawyer. You also have the right to notify a family member of your situation. You get a phone call. None of this is really surprising. It's the typical Miranda versus Arizona rights that we have in the US, except of course in Spanish version. Also, if you are foreign in Spain, you have a few other rights that you might want to know about. You have the right to a free interpreter if you don't speak Spanish or Catalan, etc. You also have the right to communicate with your country's consulate in Spain. I don't know if everybody out there knows the difference between the embassy and the consulate. The consulate is the part of the embassy that deals with American citizens and their problems when here in Spain. So my wife Morena was just down in Madrid at the US Embassy. The deal is there are about 2 or 3 Americans sitting there at the consular section, and then 1,000 people from every other country in the world trying to get visas to go to the US. Those are the embassy people, and the consular section is a small division within the embassy. Anyway, I've never really assumed that the US consul would just drop what he's doing and rush to the police station if I get caught with my hand in some old lady's purse. Maybe if it's a serious crime or accusation, the consulate would take an interest, or if you're an important person, more important than I am, you might have some luck with that. I know that the US consulate or embassy does get involved in some of the high-profile cases that happen around the world involving American citizens traveling in other countries. Also, as I mentioned in my previous episode here, I am now officially Spanish. I'm just waiting on the final documents, but since Spain does not recognize double nationality with the US, that means that I am not supposed to get the consulate involved if I have problems with the Spanish legal system. Now that I am Spanish, I am expected to deal with the Spanish legal system as a Spaniard, not as an American. I think that's pretty typical. If I go back to the US, I will be there treated as an American. If I'm here in Spain, I'll be here treated as a Spaniard. It's not official double nationality, but that's how it works. Each country recognizes their own nationality, but not the other one. If you are from a Latin American country like Mexico or something, and you get Spanish nationality, your situation might be different. Talk to a lawyer. In any case, if you are arrested here in Spain, you should be in front of a judge within 72 hours. It'll probably be less. And except in very serious cases, the judge will probably let you go, possibly with a future court date. If you are retenido and not detenido, retained and not detained, I don't know, they can keep you for 6 hours to identify you, but not longer. I assume that's what would have happened if I had refused my, search and not given my ID when the police wanted to talk to me. I would have just ended up down at the station and they would have, made me through some unpleasant set of tactics. So in most cases, you will, after being arrested, be back on the streets in almost no time. As I wrote in my article about petty crime here in Barcelona, that's actually episode 64 of the podcast, Pickpockets in Barcelona and the Petty Crime Problem. The Spanish legal system is pretty good at getting people in and out without too much delay. I guess that's good if you're innocent. If you're a criminal, you'll probably end up free as well. I don't know if you remember that ugly situation down in Torre Pacheco, Murcia, a few weeks ago. That started because some kid beat up an old Spanish guy while his two friends filmed it, allegedly for TikTok content. That is episode 116 here, called Rise of the Far Right. It was a bit of an ominous situation down there. Anyway, the kid who did the beating was caught and he was in jail for a couple of weeks. He was tried and convicted of an attempted robbery with violence, an attempted mugging, I guess, that had happened a couple of days before, and then they just let him out. Take that as you will, but a lot of people are annoyed that the legal system has no way of dealing with people who are constantly committing petty crimes. So people, either guilty or innocent, end up back on the streets very quickly. If the judge thinks that there's a risk that you will flee the country, they could put you in prisión preventiva, sort of hold you in prison until you have your court date. One person who is a high-profile case and is currently in prisión preventiva is Santos Cerdán, the former high-ranking socialist politician and member of government. He is in prison awaiting his court date about the corruption scandal, which I also talk about in episode 116 and elsewhere. It's sort of a long story. In that case, there was some worry that he might get out and go destroy the evidence, so they put him in prison to prevent that from happening. All of this seems a bit arbitrary to me because, of course, there are a lot of other people involved in that corruption scandal who have not been sent to prison yet. Then again, I am not a legal expert. I'm just a guy out for a walk with a bottle of water and a sandwich. That's about all I've got for today. I hope the lady who accused me of stealing her wallet and phone had a good day. Actually, I hope she went home and found her stuff on the kitchen table and felt like a total asshole for calling the police on me. But I guess I will never know how this worked out for her. If you are in need of a lawyer, I got my Spanish nationality through Melcart Abogados down in Madrid. Melcart, M-E-L-C-A-R-T, Abogados, the Spanish word for lawyers. Talk to Roberto down at Melcart Abogados. He's a friend of mine, and he did my Spanish nationality. Tell him that Daniel from the Chorizo Chronicles or from the Spain to Go podcast recommended that you talk to him. I might get some sort of small commission from him if I get him some new customers. So Melcart Abogados is my recommendation. They're at melcartabogados.com, or just make your best attempt at the spelling in Google and you should find them. They're down in Madrid, but I believe they travel when necessary. They also do criminal cases. So I hope you're not reading this or listening to this in a police station somewhere, but if you are, feel free to reach out to Roberto. There are lots of ways you can support the podcast. Like I said earlier, expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. If you donate some money, I will spend it on coffee and sparkling water. I also have a mortgage, my usual life of extreme luxury up here in Barcelona. I may spend it on legal fees if some other old lady decides that I have stolen her stuff, but that is pretty unlikely, I think. 2 more things I recommend. Go to expatmadrid.com/walks for walking tours in different places around Europe. Maybe walking tours is not exactly the right thing, but they have some walking tours, some cultural tours. I did the Prado Museum. They have a tour of the Prado Museum where they let you in an hour before it opens. And you're with a guide who explains the paintings to you with a group of 4 or 5 people in a basically empty museum. It's incredible. It's the kind of thing that celebrities pay a lot of money for, but you can go to expatmadrid.com/walks and support this podcast. That's an affiliate link, so I get a commission if you sign up through that link, expatmadrid.com/walks. We also have Devour Tours, founded by my friend Lauren. I talked to Lauren here on the podcast several episodes ago. Devour has food tours and market tours in various places in Europe, especially Spain and Italy, I believe. They're at expatmadrid.com/devour, DEVOUR. I also get a commission if you sign up there. I went on their Plaza Mayor tour in Madrid several years ago. That was great. They walk you around and they get you tapas in various locations. And they explain some culture and history. expatmadrid.com/devour. Like I said at the beginning, we also have biketourinspain.com. Raul from biketourinspain.com is a longtime supporter of the podcast. So I don't officially get a commission if you sign up for a bike tour there, but Raul will appreciate it and so will I. Let me know if you do sign up and let him know so he knows that, I'm actually bringing in customers. Like I said, episode 94 is my Extremadura tour, which is literally one of the best Spain experiences I have had in over 20 years. Episode 76 is the route of Don Quixote. You can read my articles about life in Spain over at expatmadrid.com. I am in Barcelona these days, but I got the domain expatmadrid.com 12 years ago, and here we are. So expatmadrid.com has most of these podcast episodes as written essays, but it also has a lot more stuff. Check me out on YouTube. Learn Spanish with Daniel. I'm giving Spanish lessons on YouTube because, I love Spanish and I love Spain. Learn Spanish with Daniel. You can just put that into YouTube or into Google and you will find me. My episode last week was about the word hostia, which is very common in Spain. It's used for a lot of different things. Hostia. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, hasta la próxima. Bye.